Begin. Let's begin. Everybody's ready. Everybody has Python installed. So, why are we learning Python? Python is a language from which was created in the early 90s. So it's not brand new, but it's not the oldest language that exists. The very great advantage, it's at a very clear code. If you, I should have done something before. If you have programmed with other languages, maybe you like C or C++, there's plenty of things that are very annoying, like you put a semicolon at the end of the instruction, or you have plenty of brackets and things like that. You'll see that Python is much more clear and simpler, so it makes it a great beginner language. It's not surprising because it has been built at first to be just an educational language. And in fact, people begin to use it as a real language to build real software with it. So it's not surprising. It's powerful for text manipulation. You have big files with plenty of text, typically DNA sequence. You want to manipulate them to find things. It has all the tools you need to do that, and you can do it very easily. It can go through very large data file. It has a great complement with other languages. For instance, if you are in Python and you want to write something in C, usually it goes faster when you write it in C. Just a small part of the program, it's possible to do it in a certain extent. Things like that. Something which is very important, you have a large user group. So a lot of people are using Python. So a lot of people encounter problems. So a lot of people ask those questions online, and you have plenty of people ready to answer to you. So there's usually you just write your question in Google, and you end up on a website called Stack Overflow, which is just a question and answer website. And you have all the questions you can imagine about Python. How do I do that with that file in that certain circumstance? Somebody most likely will have asked the question before you, and somebody will have great answers to it. For example, me, I'm using Python for more than 12 years now. I only put 2 questions that was never answered before, a question that nobody asked before. So like and I use Stack Overflow every day to how do I do that? Is there a function to do that? So it's very important. It's very great to have that. It supports many advanced features. So I won't talk too much into that workshop about that, but you will see if you continue like the machine learning. Machine learning with Python workshop, you see they will use plenty of advanced features of Python and plenty of libraries that are helpful to do scientific application with Python. Okay, just to raise your hand for me to know who has never programmed whatsoever. Okay, who has okay, I guess the other program. Who has programmed in R, for instance? Okay. C or C++? 1, 2, 3. Okay. MATLAB, I don't know. Other languages, let's just say. Okay. Okay, so don't worry for people who never programmed. We begin from scratch. For people who already programmed, you will see that we talk about for loops, while loops, things like that. You will already know. But it's good to have a refresh. Okay? So for people online, I will try. So usually if there's somebody helping me with the question, because sometimes I don't see them. I will try to pay attention to the screen when a question pop up from the chat. Maybe I can put the chat somewhere. The chat here. Yeah, okay. So I will keep the chat here. If you see a question pop-ups in the chat, please raise your hand and say there's an interesting question. If I'm lost in my explanation, maybe. Okay. Okay, so there is one key rule in Python. It's very, very important. So please pay attention to that slide. Each time there are people who forget that slide. Very important. There is something in Python which is important, is the indentation. So if I want to write that, don't pay too much attention about what it means, but just here you have an error. It said there is something called an indentation error. Okay, so it means that something went wrong and you didn't make a good indentation. Indentation is like spaces that you put at the beginning of the line here. So if on my slide we see something like that, def something, and at the next line you see a space here, be sure to have the same space here and to have alignment here. If all those lines are aligned here, it needs to have an annotation here. An easy way to do it is to use the tab key, you know, the two arrows on the left up left corner of your keyboard. Use that, you will have like something like 4 spaces automatically. Be sure to have that, otherwise you will have errors. Usually in other languages you don't need to have that. We do indentation just to make the code nicer by looking, but it's not mandatory. In Python it's mandatory, and it's allow you to get rid of plenty of annoying characters like the square brackets or things like that. You don't need to use that, but the counterpart of that is to use the indentation. Okay? Keep that in mind. We won't use it right away, but it will come later. Okay? So first steps. You need to open a terminal. So maybe people are following the Unix system, you know how to do it. Otherwise, it's not that complicated. For example, me, I'm going to do it here. Command space in Mac and terminal. So you have like a program with like this kind of icon here, and just hit return. It will open you. Okay, so it's already open here, but you will open you something like that. Maybe on the screen it's the white background and black foreground. On my slides it's the other way around, but don't worry, it will be the same. Okay. So you have something like that. If you are on Windows, Start menu, Program Files, Accessory, Command Prompt, or just like you have like a search when you hit a command, the Start menu, you can search for programs. It just said CMD, which should be enough, with the same kind of logo. You hit Return, and on if some of you are on in Ubuntu, Control Alt T would be enough. Okay. Everybody managed to open the terminal? If you don't worry, raise your hand, don't hesitate to interrupt me. But I mean, it's the first step, so it's most important. If you don't follow the steps, you can do nothing in your workshop. So everybody has the terminal open? Okay. So you'll see, okay, let's do it. So we are going to open Python and exit Python. So how do we do that? So if you Mac or Linux, you hit Python 3, because this is I will explain why the 3. If it's on Windows, that hits Python. And that's all. Okay, you hit return, and normally you have some text which is printing here, Python 3 point something, maybe it's 0.7, maybe something like that. It will propose you some. Here you will see some what I call chevrons, so greater sign here. I wrote some things, not my, don't pay too much attention, but at the end I use exits, so I type myself exits, round brackets, and exits. Okay. Everybody does that. So you open Python. You don't have to write those lines, but just write exits, round brackets, enter, and normally you should end up with that. Okay? That's okay for everyone? Everybody has it? Okay, so what do we have? So here we are in the terminal. So you can see it like normally you should have something like a $sign, like your login and the $sign, or the directory you are in and the $sign. And when you type Python 3, it opens something that's different. It's with some chevrons. Chevrons mean it's Python asking you what you need to execute as command. So it waits for your instruction. And like we just at the end put an instruction saying exit, it means you exit Python. So you come back with the prompt with a $sign. Usually it should be a $sign. Maybe it's something else, but it's not like 3 chevrons. Okay, so during that time, you are inside Python, you can write Python code. If you don't see the chevrons, it means that you need to be outside Python. So click exit, write exit, and exit Python. Okay, for everyone? Each time, some people are kind of lost if they're in Python or not. If you see chevrons on my slide, it means you need to be inside Python. If you see the $sign, it means you need to be outside. Okay, for everyone? Okay. So why Python 3? Okay. So why Python 2, Python 3, the big battle? So maybe if you hit Python and you were like in Mac and Ubuntu, it will work. You have something like Python 2 point something, 2.7 usually, and something like that. So there's two versions of Python, which are currently both of the people tends to use one or the other. In my slides, I will use Python 3. It's almost the same thing. There's not that much difference, but the small difference at the very beginning of a language. So for very basic functions, you will have small differences. So I will explain the differences so that if you have a Python 2 code, you can just transform it very easily to make it compatible for Python 3. I will use Python 3, so I think I explained that in the next slide, because it's the future. People will use that more and more in the future. It has more advanced features. You can use a nice feature, which is the autocomplete in the interpreter. So if you're on the interpreter, you want to write like the name of a variable, or explain what is a variable. Maybe you have a very long name, you can just hit the tab key so that it autocompletes and says, oh, I know only one, which begins with those letters, so it autocompletes, so it's very convenient. It's a TF8 by default. What is a TF8 is an encoding of characters. So if you want to use some fancy characters like the CCD here, you can do it directly in Python 3. It's not always a very good practice to use some fancy characters because you can send your file to somebody else, and if the person don't have the character on the keyboard, it can be a little bit annoying. But I see two applications in which it can be useful. For example, me, I'm dealing with my bibliography, so I have plenty of names of foreign names with special characters, so I can deal with it more easily with that. And also I use it like in the comments. So for example, I'm studying, I'm making a data analysis. I said I take sample alpha, beta, and gamma, and rather than use it, I use the Greek letter directly. So that's a bit fancy. More and more libraries will soon not be compatible with Python 2, so we won't use specific libraries here, but if you're going in the next workshops with Python, you see that you use something like called NumPy. Soon it won't work with Python 2. So let's just prepare to that. It's what we use in the subsequent workshops. There's no longer a Python like Python here, but the advanced Python, machine learning with Python, etc. We will use Python 3. Okay. So what I said in this workshop, we work mainly with Python 3. Quite often the code would be compatible in Python 2, so I will write it in a way on my slides so that if you use Python 2, it will work most of the time. And I will point what are the differences with Python 2 so that you're aware of that and you can deal with it. Okay. So let's begin. Let's launch Python. So hit Python 3, sorry, and try to do that statement. Print, round brackets. Here you use double quotes here. Hello world is kind of tradition when you are learning a new language. The first thing that you learn is how to display on the screen the sentence hello world. It's a kind of tradition, so that's why I'm using it. Don't forget to put a double quote here and close the brackets and hit return. Okay? And normally you should have that. I'm just going to check something very rapidly. Escape. Finder. Documents. Sorry, I'm going to try to. Yeah, I'll let you. It's weird. Okay, this one. Okay, check to its name. Okay, so you hit that. There is a hello world displayed on the screen, and you have some chevrons here. So the servant means tell me what you do now. So I have finished executing what you asked me to do. So here it was just print hello world, and now I'm waiting for you to give me new instruction. I'm waiting for you. Okay. So the first slide, Python 2 versus Python 3. So it's a very basic function, print statement. It already has a difference between Python 2 and Python 3. So this syntax that we used works in the both version here. But in Python 2, you could use like print, but without any brackets. Okay. So you can print a space and hello world. It would work. Okay. If you do that in Python 3, it will raise you an error saying to you they are missing parentheses to call to the print call. Okay. So very difference for a very simple function. But yeah, that's one of the most important ones. So when you see on the internet at some point you want to have an answer, you see a text written in Python 2, usually you will figure it out because it's the syntax they are using is this one. So you just have to put brackets around it, it will work. Okay? So let's do a little bit of programming. So here it's important to see everything. So what I'm doing here is I'm storing information in what I call variables. So that guy here will be a variable, a name for a variable. You can put whatever name you want. Here I use some text. It needs to begin with a letter, no spaces, no too fancy character, no like the percentage plus minus, but you can use numbers. You can use numbers. If it begins with, it needs to begin with a letter, but inside you can use numbers. You can use the underscore, you know, which is after the zero, but with the mesh. So the underscore to separate like two words without separating it really. So that can be the name for a variable. Okay, so here I use the name some text. Why not? And here I put an equal sign saying that I'm going to store something into that variable. Okay, and I'm going to store what is a string. A string is just a text. So the way you describe the string is just you need to use double quotes. Okay. You write whatever string you want, whatever text you want, with whatever character you want, almost-ish. I will give you the some cases in which it won't work. But basically, you can write whatever you want here, and you need to close the string with a double quote here. So that object is going to be some text that is going to be stored into some text, the name of the variable. If at some point you have a variable, you want to know what is inside, you can just write the name of the variable. So here, some text, and it's displaying what is inside this this variable. So here you see that they are displaying the same text here. You can notice that here the simple quotes. I will mention why there's sometimes double quotes, sometimes single quotes. In fact, in Python, you can use either double quotes, other single quotes as far as you are coherent. Okay, so here I stored some text, but here I can also store some numbers. So here I said some integer is equals to 42, and I put it into that variable here. Okay, when I ask after what is inside some integer, I just write the name, hit return, and give me back 42. Integer are all numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or negative numbers, -1, -2, etc. If you want float numbers, it will be just with the dots, meaning that the decimal point. So some points here, some floats, the name of the variable. I will store into that variable the number, like something which is close to pi. Okay, I ask it to display it, and here it goes. Okay. Everybody managed to do that? Please do it. You need to practice a little bit. So try to write down what is on the screen, and it's the way you can get used to it. We can also manipulate some booleans. So I don't know, for people who are not familiar with programming, boolean is just we want to have the notion of true and false. So you see what will be useful. At some point you ask to Python, is that thing is true? and it gives you back true or false depending on the answer of the question you ask. So the way there's a keyword called true, so capital TRUE, okay, and the same thing for false, a capital FALS. Contrary to, I think it is C. C is all lowercase, I think. So you need in Python to have a capital, uppercase later at the first for the first one, and lowercase for the other one. Okay, it's really the keyword. So you cannot use false here. Typically, I try to say a boolean will be attributed to false, and it says basically gives me an error. It says to me, I don't know what false is. I have no idea what it is. Okay, but here it works. Okay for everyone. Can I continue? No question on the chat. Okay, let's continue. Yeah. Working with a number. So we're going to work with numbers. So let's do it. So first of all, I create a variable. I choose to call it my number. Why not? I will assign it to be 2. Okay. Then there is another number, my over other number, assigned to be 3. And now I say my number is going to be equals to 4. And I ask to Python, what is my number plus my other number? That's weird. Maybe some of you have thought, looking at this example, okay, I take my number is 2, add it to my other number, which is 3. It should give me back the answer 5. It's kind of weird. Okay, you see what has happened here? Can somebody tells me what happened? What has happened? No. Okay, so at first I say in the first line, I said, okay, my number is going to be 2. Okay. I put that aside, my number is 2. Then my other number is 3, I put that aside, is 3. And now I say, oh, but now my number is going to be something completely different, it's going to be 4. So I reassign to my number another value, something else. So here is no longer, my number is no longer 2, now it's, for now on, it will be 4 until you say that that number is attributed to something else. So when I ask to Python, what is my number plus my other number? So for now, my number is 4, and added to my other number, which is still 3. So it gives me back 7. Okay? You can make operations, so that's the plus sign, obviously. You can make the multiplication with the star sign, like here. So my number star multiplied by 2 is going to be 8. 4 times 2 is 8. You can divide by my number divided by 2 is going to be 2. My number, or to the power of 2, is going to be 16. So 2 star means to the power of. Okay? So my number to the power of 2, 4 to the power of 2 is going to be 16. Something which is not always useful, but rarely useful, but sometimes can be useful, is my number. And here you have the percentage sign. I don't know if you remember when you're like in primary school, you first learned the division, and when you divided 10 by 3, you said it was 3 times 3 plus 1. So the remainder is 1. So it's what is doing this operation. So here I ask to Python, what is the remainder of the operation from my number divided by 2? Of course, 4 divided by 2 is 2 times 2 plus 0, so it gives me back 0. Okay, so the percentage sign gives you back the modulo. Okay? Yeah.
Is there a way to edit previous lines?
So what you can do is you made a mistake or something. You can use the arrow, up arrow. It gives you back the line before, the line before, the line before, and you can go back here and edit it so that it corresponds to, it's beginning to be correct. Okay. Okay, everyone, I can continue. Okay. Reassigning variables. So here I say my number is equals to 4. And I'm going to say that my number is going to be equal to my number times 2 plus 1. So, and then at the end I ask what is my number. Just a side note here, I just put the brackets here. They are not mandatory. It's just to for you to better see what's happening. But of course, the multiplication has the priority regarding the addition. So can somebody predict what it would be? 9. Okay. So why is that? So at first, my number is equals to 4. And then when I do that, I say, oh, my number is going to be assigned to something. Okay. So Python is ready to do that. It looks at this part of the equal sign, and it will solve this part of the equal sign before storing it into the variable my number. So it will do my number times 2 plus 1, but my number for until then is still equal to 4. So we solve this equation. 4 times 2 plus 1 is 9, and we store this information anew in my number. Okay. So don't be surprised if there is the same name of the variable in two sides of the equal sign. It won't be like an equation like in mathematics. In fact, the equal sign in some languages like Maple, I think, and maybe other, it's more like a line, like a chevron and a dash, meaning a sign saying that you're going to assign something. So this equal sign here is not really an equal, it's more assigning something to something else. So if you have that in mind, it makes sense. My number times 2 would be 8 plus 1, 9, and I assign that value here in my number here. So indeed it's 9. Okay? Division of integer, Python 2 versus Python 3. It was a huge source of bugs in Python 2, so I'm glad they changed it. Like, you cannot imagine the number of times I was stuck with something that's stupid. So you have two integers here, 7, and I want to have the division by 2, and it gives me back 3. Kind of weird, because when it's not the case. When I divide 7 by 2, it should be 3.5. Okay, so why is that? It's because here you have an integer here and an integer here. So Python by default, when it has two integers, it makes the Euclidean division. So the one you did at school. So 10 divided by 3, 3 times 3 plus 1. So it gives you back 3 if you make 10 divided by 3. So in order to prevent that problem, we need to transform one of the two integers. So I will explain in more detail what it is, but here you say, oh, that number is no longer, I'm going to transfer that object, which is an integer, into a float. So in that case, it do it properly and gives me back 3.5. So at least one of the two terms of the division needs to be a float. Where you are in Python 3, automatically it works well. You have 7 divided by 2, gives you back 3.5. If you really want to have the Euclidean division, then you can use just a double slash. It makes the Euclidean division by default. Okay. It was a huge source of bug in Python 2. Typically have like a whole bunch of number. I want to take the mean, so I sum all the number. I divide it by the length of the total, how many number I had. So it was an integer divided by an integer. I have something like 0 or something, and I was taking the mean of positive number. So it was something weird, and it was hidden somewhere in the code. So it was a huge source of bug, which is hopefully no longer the case. Where's my prompt here? Okay. So kind of a difference between two kind of objects, which are integer and floats. So how do we write an integer? So you just have to write the number, but without any decimal point. You can use the dash line at the beginning to have negative numbers. You can have how many numbers you want. Be careful, the comma is not a good way to separate. There's no way to separate the thousands from the units. Don't use a comma. Comma has a different meaning. So if you do that, Python will understand something else that you don't want. So write those numbers without any spaces, any comma, just all the numbers stuck together. Okay. Floats would be a kind of different kind of object. It's not whole numbers. It can be numbers with decimal points. So you just need to put a decimal point here. So 2.5. You can also use the notation E. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It just means 2 times 10 to the power of 4. Okay, so it's shorthand to write the notation. It gives you back a float number. So you can see that even this number is like 20,000. It's an object which is a float number because it displays it with a 0.0, meaning that it's a float, it's not an integer. You can do it with a negative number, it would be the same here. Some people are kind of confused why we have two different kind of objects, one which is the integer and the other one which is the float. Can we just always use floats? So that's because integers are floats in a sense. There's two reasons why we prefer to have two objects. For the way it's represented on the computer, you can have, if you're using integer, you can have access to much bigger integer because it's storing less information. You don't have all the number after the decimal point. And also something is typically at some point you will ask is you ask to compute to Python is 3. So I have something like a is equals to 3, and I can ask the price I can ask 3 is equals to 3. So I will explain what is equal to. That's just a way to ask Python, is that number equals to that number? If you are dealing with integer, so it's very easy. 3 is indeed equals to 3, it gives you back true. And if I do that, it will be false. Okay? But if you have something like is 3 is equals to 3.0000001, something like that, it will tell you, oh, that's not the same object here. Okay? Even if they are very close to each other. So we won't handle the same way. So like if you have numbers, you can very easily make a comparison that is that object is that number exactly the same as that number? If you are dealing with floats, you will do something like you make the subtraction of the 2, you take the absolute value, and you look at if that number is very much smaller than 10 to the power of minus 12 or something like that. So a different way to handle the objects. Okay? So that's why we have two kind of objects, and you see very naturally that we will use either one or the other. And of course, you can transform one to the other using the example shown here. You have an integer here. You put float into brackets, the object that you want to transform, and transfer that object into a float. Okay for everyone? Simple? Okay. Some useful functions, which is meme. So that is a function. So it's something already built into Python. So it's a function. So it takes some parameters as entry. So the way syntax we do that, you have the name of the function that you need to know, round brackets, and all the parameters separated by comma. Okay. So here I want the minimum between 5, 7, 3, 5, 8, and 2. The minimum of all those numbers are 2. The same thing for the maximum. The maximum for all those numbers is 8. The absolute value, ABS, absolute value of minus 10, is 10. And you can even use something called type. So if you don't know if you are dealing with an integer or with a string, you can ask to Python, okay, what is the type of that object? You use type, and into brackets, the object that you want to inspect. So here I ask to Python, what is the type of minus 10? It tells me that basically it's a type of integer. What if I do with the minus 10.4? It will be float. Okay. Let's forget about that last line. It's the difference between strings and numbers. I will go into details later. Do you have questions so far? Everything is clear? Okay. Working with text now. Okay. So, as I told you, the way we introduce strings, text if you want, is usually with either single or double quotes. So here I use a double quotes, why not? And I say, hey Python, so whatever text you want. And don't forget to put the quotes at the end. And it gives me back just displaying what you just wrote because I didn't store anything into it. So if I wrote something like A is equals to hey Python, it will display nothing because you have stored that into that object. If you don't put that here, and you will just display that object. Okay. So, hey Python, you can see that it chooses to display it with a single quote because you can introduce a string with either single or double quotes, but it needs to be coherent. So if you begin your string with a double quote, you need to close it with a double quote. If you're beginning with a single quote, You could close it with a single quote. A single quote, okay, it works. You can use like what about the symbols? So here I use plenty of symbols, even some non-traditional one, like this letters from my French keyboard. It works without any problem because you are in Python 3. If we were in Python 2, it will raise you an error. And here I try to write something like, what's the deal with quotes in text? And it tells me like, oh, there's something wrong, invalid syntax. Somebody can see what happened? Raise your hand, don't be shy, tell me, yeah, tell me.
Okay, so it tells you that there's something wrong with the syntax, but then it's corrected with the
backslash. Yeah, so here what I did is I tried to introduce the sentence with a single quote. I'm allowed to do that. And I wrote that, and then I use a single quote, but to make the apostrophe. So Python won't understand what's happening. It will just say, oh, so that guy here is a string, and you try to interpret whatever that thing means. And it makes no sense for it. So it's just say, oh, I do not understand what's happening. But if you want to do that, basically you can use what we call an escape character. It means that this character won't be displayed, but it means that the next character would be it should not be interpreted as something from the Python syntax. It should be interpreted as a real character. So that backslash apostrophe means I'm going to interpret that code as being an apostrophe and not as being one to close the string. And that's better, and then you can use a single quote, and it will work. As you can see, you choose to display it with double quotes here to avoid the ambiguity. Sorry. So that will work here. You introduce it with a double quote, it closes it with a double quote. But it's better, I think, each time you see a quote or double quote, you want to incorporate that character into your string to use an escape character before, so that it will work each time. Okay? So you can ask Python questions. So you can say, oh, is something in something? So typically, you can ask with strings, you can say, is tata in ta-ta-ta-ta-ta? So is that motif into that string? Can you find it somewhere, at least once? If it's the case, it gives you back a Boolean, true. And if it's false, then it gives you back false. Is AA, so the two consecutive letter, is in ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. Of course, Python can never find ta-ta-ta-ta-ta in AA in ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, so it gives you back false. You can also do something a little more mind-twisting. Is AA not in that? So indeed, AA is not in that sentence here, so it gives you back true. Okay? So, yeah. Something weird here, I use plus sign. So I'm going to add together two texts, which is maybe usually we add number, not text. So the way Python is interpreting that is just glue together the two text, the two string you have. So here we have AC plus TG gives you back one single string, which is AC TG. And AA was another example. Oh, I have a question. Can I string and integer using plus? No. But we'll see in an instant that you cannot use add, a string and an integer, but you can use a multiplication between a string and an integer. I'm going to show you, I think it's the next slide. In fact, it's the same next line. So here I have the motif ta, so with string, ta, and I multiply it with an integer. So I have, it's quite so obvious since the addition is just gluing together as if you made ta plus ta plus ta, etc. So just glue it together. I still cannot share anything. I'm afraid, Jiang Yang, that is because other people can hear me online, I think. So I'm afraid it's something on your own computer. If you are using, oh yeah, you cannot hear me. Okay, sorry, I'm going to deal with that. Okay. Okay, so you can multiply by your right-hand side, a string by an integer, or by the left-hand side. Okay, problem. Just going to stop here for just to show you something. Sometimes students are disturbed by these two kind of objects. So, for example, if I have a is equal to 10, so that is an integer. I store it into a, and here I have b, and I say that is the string 10. Those two objects are different. They are not the same thing. B is the string representation of the number 10. It's two characters, 1 and 0. And A is really a number. The way to handle that is to see what will happen if you do A plus A, it gives you back 20, right? If you do B plus B, what will give you back? 10, 10. Yeah. So the string 10. Okay? So those two objects are really different. You need to understand that. Of course, you can go from one to the other. So if you want to, from A to have, from a number to have the string representation of that number, you can use str of A. And the other way around, if you have a string that's representing a number, you can use int of B, and gives you back the representation of it. Of course, it needs to make sense. If you like, try to transform it into integer a string that is a, it will give you back, you throw an error saying I cannot interpret that as being a number. But if it's the character as 1 and 0, it will work. Okay? Okay, so let's stop that. Okay, so if you want to access to certain character of the string, so you have plenty of characters, P, I, T, H, O, N, and you want to access to say, oh, what is the first one, the second one, the last one, etc. So here, we are using square brackets. It means that you have an object which is subdivided into a smaller object, and you want to access to the first element, the second one. So typically, you have a string, you want to access to the first element, which is the first character, etc. In Python, contrary to other languages, to not all of them, like I think in R they begin to come from 1. In Python, we begin to count from 0. I know that is kind of strange, but the first element of the string will be at index 0. So here I have Python. So the word Python. And here I will have the index corresponding to the first letter. So it begins from 0. Okay. So here, if I want the first element, I use square brackets, and here I put an integer corresponding to the index. So if I want to access to the P here, the first element, you need to put index 0. If I want to access the second one, it will be of index 1. If you want to access to the fifth element, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it will be the n, right? What if you want to access to the element 6? It gives you back an error because there's no string at index 6 because the maximum index is 5. Okay, but if you use that function called len for length of one object, it gives you back the length. So typically, a string gives the number of characters. It gives you back 6. Okay. I've already managed to do that. No error. Works fine. There's something cool in Python that you can use negative index, which is kind of weird, but it can be very useful sometimes. So you can use negative numbers to access to the last element, so counting from the end. So -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6. Okay. So if I want the last element of the string, I can use just the square bracket -1. It would be the end here, right? Yeah. And if I want to use -5, so the -5 element is y, right? Yep.
What would be the purpose of that?
So typically you have a file, the name of the file, and you want to look at is it a .txt at the end. So you will use you will use that syntax with a negative number, saying so you have the name of the file which is represented as a string, and you check if it's .txt at the end, then you are doing something, etc. Something like that. Another example, I mean, yeah, when you are dealing with the one that pop up in my mind right now, but I think there's many cases when you want to access the last element of the strings. Also, you will use, we'll see later, I think it's tomorrow, lists of numbers with the same way to access the element of the list. And also, if you imagine list of numbers, you want to access the last elements, something like that. Here is something called a slice. So you put the square brackets, and here I ask to Python, I want all the elements starting from index 1 up to index 4 without including the one at index 4. Some kind of a logic. So I want all the elements from index 1 up to index 4, but without including this guy. So just YTH. Okay? Okay, I can continue. No question, try online. Okay. So here I created a small sequence. So yeah, maybe you, at the first slides, I was putting some spaces between the equal, and here I don't put them. That's okay, that does not matter. Just to, sometimes you have like a nicer look to be better. You have a sequence, you can access to the length, as I show you, the length of the object you want to inspect, which is 4. There is something called a method. So a method is a kind of function, but it's dedicated for one particular object. It's a kind of function, but you have an object which is a string here, and you can access to a method, so it's kind of transformation you are doing on that particular object. And the method is called lower and run brackets. So there's nothing inside because there is no parameter, but maybe there will be some other method that can be a parameter, and gives you back the lowercase version of your object. So that's AGCT. The lowercase will be AGCT, but in lowercase. The same thing with upper run brackets. They don't need any parameter here. And so it's changing nothing because it was already in uppercase, but if you are like uppercase, lowercase, it will transform everything into uppercase. That is the transformation from any object you want into a string representation. It will do its best, so for numbers it works pretty well, just transforming the object into a string object. You can print you can print strings, obviously. So here I print sec plus sec plus sec. So it's the gluing together of all that object and displaying on the screen. You have a function called count, the number of times you find that particular motif into the string. Here A is only found one time, so it gives you back 1. Okay? Okay for everyone? Can continue? No questions? Okay, so I already had this one. Another one, which is find. So it's ask Python, where do you find, what is the index where you first encounter this particular motif? Okay, so it's the index. So for AGCT, the index 0 is at A is index 0, G is index 1, and C is index 2. So the first time it finds the object C, it gives you back 2 here. Okay, the index. It's the first time it finds it. If there is all time C in your sequence, it just give you the first time it finds it. Okay. Starts with, obviously, is it this sequence starting with AG? Yes, and true. And if is it starting with GC? Then it's false. But you can ask, you can have another parameter here, saying, is it starting from GC, starting from one particular index? So here from index 1. So is it starting by GC, but starting when you begin by index 1 is the G. So starting from here, yeah, this string begins with GC. So it's true. Yeah.
Does that only work for strings or work with the float?
No, it will work with strings only. Okay for everyone? A small difference, Python 2 versus Python 3. Oh, this one is not that common, but find it somewhere. Yeah, I will try to do that myself. Wait a second, I need to deal. No. Participant. Yeah. Yeah, so I've muted everybody except me. Okay. So what is text input? So it's when you want to ask the user a certain question. So I'm going to delete those files. Do I continue? Yes or no? Those kind of questions, you know. So in Python 2, you have a function called raw input. And here you put a string. It's the question that will be displayed and that the user needs to answer to. So like it's what is your name? In Python 3, it's just like the function is called input rather than raw input. Be careful, in Python 2, input is another function which is doing something else. So it's not always compatible between the two. It's not that common that you use that function. So input here in Python 3. So display the question here, the string that you put here. And here you will see that it does not give you back the chevrons when you do that. So it waits for you to answer the question. You write the answer to the question, it's your turn. And the answer to that question will be stored into the name of the variable you used. So here's name. So the answer of the question will be stored into that. Okay? Basically is what I just said. So you can do that, name. So I'm going to store something in the variable name. What will it be? It will be whatever answer that the user will give to the question, what is your name? So when you do that, it displays what is your name. So me usually answer Renault, and Renault will be stored into name, but whatever the user will have answered will be stored into that variable, which will be a string. Just to show you that there is a small syntax here. So once you do that, you stored the answer of the user to the variable name, and then you are going to use that variable here to do things with it. For example, I'm going to print your name is, and I put my name here. So there is something weird, which is with the %s, what is the thing? And at the end, when I close the string with the double quote, sorry, I use percentage and something here. Kind of weird. So in fact, each time you see a string with a %s here, it means that you are going to insert some part of the text at that precise position. And what are you going to insert is whatever is stored in name. Okay? So double quote means you are going to write a string. You write your string. At some point, you are going to have %s. I'm going to insert something here, point. Close my string with double quote, and here I put the percentage and the name of the variable that I'm going to insert here. So here it gives me back your name is Renault because I'm inserted Renault here, point. Okay, so I've inserted the content of name here. Okay? Okay. Just to show you that you can put spaces here and here if you want. It does not change anything. You can put parentheses here. It's not mandatory in that case, but you see just in the next comment that it would be useful to have the parentheses. But if you have just one thing to insert, you don't have to put the parentheses here. Okay. Here I'm going to store into the variable called lang, the string Python, and I'm going to display my name is, I'm going to insert something here. We see later what it is. And I use, I'm going to insert something else here and see what I use, what I will insert here. I close the string, percentage sign, and here I put brackets. So here the brackets are mandatory, and I put all the elements that I need to insert in the right order, separated by comma. So name will be inserted here, and lang will be inserted here. My name is Renault, and I use Python. Okay. No questions? Types of variables. Okay, I'm going to, if you want to have a variable like an integer, you want to transform it into a float or the other way around or things like that. So you have small functions, which is int, bool, etc. in order to transform one object to the other. So here I have a float, 2.1, and I'm transforming it into an integer. So what it does is just the truncation. It drops all the decimal points and gives you back an integer, which is 2. Here I'm transforming a string, 42. The string representing the number 32 is not the number 32, and I'm transforming it into an integer. Okay. Boolean. So Boolean is pretty much everything which is not 0 in a sense will be transformed as true, and 0 will be transformed as false. So Boolean of 1 is true. You can have Boolean of 42 or whatever. It will give you back true, unless it's Boolean of 0. When you're using it with strings, Boolean of an empty code, so there's absolutely nothing inside here. It just open the string and I close it right away. There's absolutely nothing, then it gives me back false. But as soon as there is something, even just a space, so here is just a space, and gives me back true. Okay, so be careful about that. You can also use float to transform an integer into a float. Okay. So you can ask a question to Python saying, is that number equals to that number, or those kind of things. So it's what I'm doing here. So I asked to Python here, the first one is 2 minus 1 not equal. So the exclamation mark equal means not equal to 1. Is 2 minus 1 not equal to 1? Of course, 2 minus 1 is 1. It is equal to 1, so the sentence is false. So it gives me back false. When you want to ask the question, is something equals to something, you need to use a double equal. Why a double equal and not just a simple equal? It's because the simple equal is a sign dedicated for the assignment, which is a different logic as the comparison between two objects. So is 2 equals to 5 divided by 2, that's the Euclidean division. 5 divided by 2 is 2 times 2 plus 1, so it gives me back 2. And 2 is indeed equals to 2, so it's 2. Is 1 less than 2? That's true. If you want less or equal, you use that sign here, less or equal, greater and equal. Okay? No problem? So maybe it's kind of weird to have those kind of asking questions like that. Maybe you don't see that is would be not useful, but you'll see in the if statement and while statement that it will be very useful to do that. If there's that, then I will do that, and if it's something else, then I will do something else. You can manipulate all those booleans using the keyword not, and, or. Quite straightforward. So if you have like a boolean, you use not, it will transform it into the opposite. So not true is false. And if both of them are true, then it's true. If one of them is false or the two are false, it's false. True and true is true. True and false is false. Or is either one of the two is true. If the both are false, then it's false. True or false is true. And this one, true or not, true and untrue. So we go step by step. True and true, giving back true. Not true is false. So it's false or false, it will be false. Okay. If-else statement. So for people already programmed, should already ring a bell, I guess. So what is it? So you have your program, your different statement, the Python is executing line after line, and at some point you want to differentiate if of one case or the other. If something happens to be true, then I want to execute some statements here, I want to execute some things, and I continue. And if it's false, I directly jump here from here, okay? The if-else statement is almost the same thing. You have some statement, I executed that, then I ask Python, is true? If it's true, then I execute those statements here, and then I continue the program. If it's not, else, I will do something else. So I will execute other statements here, and I continue the program like the rest. Okay? So let's do that. So the syntax in Python is the following. You use a keyword called if, so that's a keyword, condition, whatever condition you need. So here, for example, is my number is bigger or equals to 2. And then you have a column. Tip, each time you see a column in my slides, it means that the next line at least needs to be indented. So here you have an indentation, use the tab key to have an indentation. And you print the code to execute. If it's just a if statement, then you don't need to write the else statement, but if you want to add an else statement, you use else, column. If there is a column, next line, indentation, I'll do something else. So on this example, I just say my number is 5, and I check if my number is bigger or equals to 2. If it's the case, then I'm going to print big number, and if it's not the case, I'm going to print small number. Sorry, that's it. I hit return. Maybe you need to add 2 times return. Don't worry. You go to the line and once again, and gives you back that. Normally it should be big number because my number is bigger than 2. Okay. Maybe you make an error in the statement. Use the up arrow to go back and deal with the spelling mistake you did. Okay. Everybody managed to have that? No questions? If, elif, else. So it's kind of straightforward when you understand that elif stands for else if. So if that is true, else, if that is true, then I do that. And otherwise, in all the other cases, I will do that. Okay? So if my number is bigger than 2, then I will print big number. If it's not the case, but my number is equal to 1, I say that it's normal number. And if in all other cases, I will say that it's small number. Okay for everyone? Okay, sorry, some typing is still here. Sometimes some students are kind of don't see the point of having elif rather than just putting an if statement. So in that case, it won't work. I try to find a case in which it will work. If, so let's just say a is equals to 5. Let me see. Is equals, of course, to 6. Print something. Whatever. And if A is bigger than 3, print something else. And else, print something else. So, no, sure, sorry, I should make something better. Sure. Okay, so let's do that. So here, if I do that, so A is equals to 6, you go through that line, you said, oh, A is equals to 6, so I'm going to print that, and I go directly to the other statement if there is any. I don't go through that or that. Even if A is indeed bigger than 3, it won't go through line through that condition here because it was already satisfied for the first one. If I had something here, rather than having elif, I'd have if. Then it'll go through that line, it will print that. If it will go through that line here, I said, oh, it's also bigger than 3, it also prints that. So we'll print that and that. Okay? Kind of the two differences. Functions. So, maybe you want to make the same operation over a lot of number of times. So you want like to do addition, then subtract, then do something else. But you want to do it like 1 million of times, rather than just copy paste each time in your terminal the same line. You can use what we call a function. So we use function already. For example, the ABS for the absolute value, the maximum, MMX, that is function that are already built in Python. But you can define your own functions. So we do it with the syntax. So you use the keyword called def, D-E-F. Then you put the function name. So you can use whatever name you want with no spaces. It needs to begin by a letter, things like that. But here, for example, function name is completely proper name. And here you put parentheses. And here you are going to put the name of the parameters that you are going to use only in the function. Okay? So parameter 1 and parameter 2 needs to be used in the definition of the function that will be defined here. It will be the name parameter 1 and parameter 2 is only, makes sense only in the definition of the function here. So basically, so yeah, that you close the parentheses, you use column. If you have column, the next line you need to have a notation. And here you put the definition of the function. As far as those things are indented, so there's one space here, it means that all those things are parts of the definition of the function. As soon as you see a line without the annotation, it means that it's outside the definition of the function. You put your code here, and you use the keyword return, and you use what you want to return at the end. And once you have defined that, you can use it after that in your code just by calling it like a normal function. So let's do an example. I'm going to define the function called my first function. So I use the keyword def space my first function parentheses, and here I choose a name for my first parameter, my first and only parameter here. So my parameter, why not? I close the parentheses. I use column. Okay. Then I go to the line. If there is a column, then I need to have an notation. Print running my first function question mark. And then I will return, so it's still indented, so it's still in the definition of the function, my parameter times 3. So my parameter makes sense here because it's it has been defined here. Okay. So once you hit return, it does nothing. What it basically do is that, Python say, I defined this function, I just put it somewhere and wait for the user to use it once again. Okay. And we then can use it. So I will use my first function, which is the name of the function, with that particular parameter. So what Python does, he said, my first function is the function I have defined. It brings back that. It replaces my parameter by 2 and use it each time you see my parameter, it will be replaced by 2. So it reprints that statement and returns 2 times 3, which is 6. So it prints that line here and brings you back the answer here. Okay. So here it displays the result of the function because I didn't put like a name of the variable equals to something. So it does each time you don't put something equals to something, it displays the last thing it has, which is the number. But here I said my number is the result of my first function to that number. Python goes into the definition of that function. It replaces my parameter by that big number here. It print that statement here. It make the operation my parameter times 3, so that number times 3. It's the result of the function. It is stored into my number here, running my first function, question mark, and it displays nothing because it's stored into my number. Then I ask what is inside my number, and it is whatever is that number times 3. Okay? No question for the definition of function. Sometimes some students are saying, oh, but why do I define, my parameter has never been defined before. In fact, my parameter just makes sense into the definition of the function. So here I'm just going to refer to the first parameter with that name here. And I will use it in the definition of my function using that name here. But if you have defined your function, you go to the line and whatever, and you want to access, like you have the chevron, so you have no indentation, you are outside the definition of the function, and you want to access to my parameter, it will make no sense. And Python tells you, I don't know what it is. My parameter makes sense only in the definition of the function and not outside. Okay. Clear for everyone? Cool. Okay, so I'm going to use my first useful function because for now it was very silly functions to use. I'm going to calculate the GC contents. So I know that now people from humanities are coming. Don't worry. So my example, like biology applied, but you see that's very simple. So it's just like you have a sequence of A, T, G, and C, and I want you to count how many times I find G and C into that sequence. Okay. So a good way to do it, especially if you are not familiar with programming, and sometimes even if you're familiar with programming, for complicated algorithm, it can be useful to have that, is what we write what we call a pseudocode. So you write with pseudo-English what you are doing line by line. You subdivide the algorithm into small steps in English, and then you take your, on a piece of paper, for instance, and then you take your program and you translate this pseudocode into Python code. So first I will have a function with an input which would be a sequence. Then I will count how many times I find G in the sequence. Then I will count how many times I find C in the sequence. I will sum G and C occurrences. I will divide the sum by the total sequence length, and I will return the result. Okay, so that's written in English, and I'm translating here. So that's input to the sequence that I will define a function. I will try to call it like GC content. Why not? This function will have one parameter, which is called sec. I close the parentheses, column. I go to the line. Annotation. Don't forget the annotation. So all those guys here will be part of the definition of the function. G count will contain the number of G occurrences. And then I will use sec, so sec will be a string, so I can use the method called count. It will count how many times I find that motif, which is G, and I will store that number into G count. I do the same for the C count. I count how many times I find C, and I put it, storing it into C count. Total count will be the total number of letters that you find in your string, so it will be len for length of sec. And then I will use GC content. It will be the number of times I find G, plus the number of times I find C, divided by the total count. And I return the result, that is return GC content. You hit return, you have defined your function properly. You use GC content, you can use that function here, and you can use it on that example, for instance, AT, CCC, GGG. and gives you back a number between 0 and 1, normally, telling what is the percentage of times we have G and C's. Okay? Everybody managed to do that? Who managed to have that line here? 0.75. Raise your hand. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so I wait a little bit. Try to do it. I know that's annoying. That's part of the. Yeah, I know that's annoying, but I think it's important to do it. At some point, I asked myself if I just get rid of the terminal. I know it's not a very user-friendly tool, but I think it's good just to practice a little bit and to try to know not to do that much mistakes, etc. I will show you a tool just in a moment that will maybe find it maybe a little bit more useful. Okay. Yes.
Mine says true stop an error message.
So, name error means Python telling you, I don't know what is this. What is this byte? So at some point it says that I think it's this line here. It does not understand what is this guy.
Oh, what's
It's supposed to be this. So you can use the arrow. You need to redefine everything. So to go back from that line.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, but you can use the arrow. So yeah, or return. Then you can use the arrow once again. Correct one and so on. Don't hesitate if you have a question. I have just some to them who are silent. Question? No, that's okay. So you need to show so in order to open so here you can write anything to see the trend, which can you see that since you are going to wait, you should be so you can here you choose to have limitation just one space. It will work, but you need to change the space. Usually, because we didn't make a limitation here. Go to the line and you do the space here. Here you will see an limitation that represents the whole baby. That he or she stuff. They still have things to so you use one space, it will work, but usually we use 4 spaces, and for that we just but it will work if you use one space in addition.
I go back and I made a mistake and I just want to like go and change this particular thing.
So, you can set that. You need to go back. You can use the arrow.
Okay.
So for example here, take the minutes again, and then I can use the arrow to go back to this one, change count. You do that. I know it's a little bit annoying.
Oh, so there's no way to just change one?
No, yeah, there's no way to change one. I know it's a little bit annoying. And if you continue in the machine learning with Python, I will introduce you to a magnificent tool which will solve every those kind of annoying thing. But I prefer to have that at first for the first workshop, because the tool I will present in the next workshop is very advanced, and sometimes I'm afraid the students are kind of lost. If there is too much freedom, then they are kind of lost. I prefer to constrain the bits at the beginning so that they do the things right. Have other questions? No? Okay. Everybody managed to add that? Can I continue? Sure. Alors. Whoa. A lot of things happened. Yes, so somebody has on the internet has written 0 instead. I think it was the next slide. Yeah. Yeah. So the person online, what's the name? Where are you? Yeah. Sarah. Sarah, I think you are in Python 2. So it's what I said at the beginning of the workshop. When you are dividing an integer by another integer, if you're in Python 2, it gives you back the Euclidean division. So 10 divided by 3 will be 3 and not 3.333. Okay? So typically in that example, G count, C count are going to be integers, so it gives you back, when you do the plus sign here will give you back an integer. Total length is also an integer. You divide an integer by another integer, and typically this number is smaller than this number. It gives you back 0. Okay? So that would be the case if you were in Python 2. I think you are. In order to prevent that behavior in Python 2, you can just put a float, round parenthesis of whatever term, and normally it should work, because in Python 2, when you add a float plus an integer, it gives you back a float. When you divide a float by an integer, it gives you back a float, etc. So if you're on Python 2, or if you want to have a code compatible for Python 2, be sure to put a float somewhere and try to remember where there's the integers. So I think, Sarah, if you use the syntax of the particular slide, you see here there's float of G count, for instance. It should work, and it should better work. Okay? I'm just going to check your code to be sure, because you plotted count. Yeah. Sarah, maybe you install the Python properly, but you open it with just writing Python. When you're in the terminal, you just wrote Python. So if I'm going to make the example here. Where are you? Terminal. So here, if you just use Python, I'm on Mac or Linux, it will be the same. Normally, if I just do Python, oh no, by default it makes it. Okay, but so maybe if you just use Python and without the 3 at the end, it might open you by default Python 2. So be sure that you open Python with using Python 3 here, and it will work. You see that Python 3 point something. Okay, you have questions? No? Modules. So there's 3 ways to there's three ways to run a Python code. The first one is the interactive environment, is what we have done so far. We open a terminal, we launch Python, hitting Python 3 or just Python if you are on Windows, and you execute some code. It goes line by line. So it's not an awesome tool, but it's just a great way to discover Python, to make some tests, try to add things together. But obviously it's not the way programmers usually use Python, because usually a program in Python is can be thousands of lines of codes. So it's not, you're not going to copy paste each time. So it's more for teaching and for testing. Another way is modules. So modules, it's just a whole bunch of functions using def, the def syntax, etc. And rather than putting them into the interactive environment, we put them into a text file, a very simple text file. And then we open Python with the terminal, etc. And we access to those functions using some syntax, saying, oh, from that file, I want to have that function, and I'm going to use it into my interactive environment. That's the second way to run Python code, and I will talk about scripts tomorrow, which is the third way to use Python code. Okay, so modules, you can define your own modules. We're going to do that at the end of today. But there are already modules that are available for you right away as soon as you install Python. So let's do it. So for instance, at some point I need the square root. So like in almost all languages, square root is SQRT for square root of 25. I try to use it because I don't know that, I try it, why not? And Python tells me name error means that I do not understand something. And then they say, Python say, I don't know what SQRT stands for. I don't know what it is. Because SQRT is not a function that is directly available when you just open Python. It's not like len for length or max or min. It's not built in already into Python. But there is a module that is installed as soon as you install Python that you can call, which is called math. And math would be a file somewhere in your computer. You don't need to know exactly what it is. Python is doing it for you. But math is a file, text file containing plenty of functions that might be useful when you're dealing with math things. So typically the square root. So you can hit import space and use the name of the module, which is called math. And once you have math, you have access of plenty of functions useful. So for example, you can use math, the syntax is the name of the module, dot, and the name of the function, which is, in that case, SQRT, square root, and you have 25, and it will give you back 5. But there's not only SQRT, there's plenty of them. Exp for exponential of 1. Log 10 is logarithm base 10. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Are you limited to 15 decimal points? Or is that just
Yes.
default setting?
Yeah. You are limited to. So it's a tricky question. Let me think. 2 seconds. Yes. So there's a limit for sure. Is it 15 or maybe it's because sometimes it made an operation and does not display everything just for visually. So it might be like it's not 15, but maybe 36, but there is a limit. And if you really want to have precise operations, so there's a notion between floats and double. If you are familiar with C on C++, you have the two difference. So a float would be on 36 bytes, sorry, in English. And you can ask to have twice more, so 64. In that case, it's a double, and you have more precise operation. So yes, there is a limit. I think that when you do it like without the print statement, but just like that, it displays everything you can so that's the maximum precision you can have. So math in log 10, so that's another function. You can have, it's very rare, but here's an example. Something else that is not typically functions, but constants, like numbers. So pi is in math.pi, is the constant pi, is the number. So that's one way to use a module. But let's just say that so programmers by default are very, very lazy people. So if there is a way to do it, to write less, they will do it. So let's just imagine that you don't care about pi, you don't care about logarithm base 10, you just care about square root. But you are going to write square root 100 times in your code. So you don't want to write math.square root at each time. So rather than do that, you have another syntax. When you want to import just one particular function, you can do from the name of the module, here math, imports one particular function, and then you can use it directly without putting math dot something, okay? Then you can use square root directly of 9. The last line is not very good to use, but you will find it sometimes on the internet, so I'm mentioning it. From math, import star, so it means import everything. In square root, x, etc., and then you can use directly log 10 without putting the math dot something. I do not advise you to do that because when somebody else look at your code and see a function but does not know where it comes from, it's very annoying if there is a bug on that function or he or she tries to understand what your codes come from. So if you use the syntax from math import the name of the function, the person will understand where it's coming from. So it will be much easier to debug and things like that. If you want to import like two functions, you can just like do from math import square root, comma, log 10, for instance. If you want to have several of them, it's another way. Okay, some typings. So I'm going just while you finish typing. So there is plenty of building module available in Python. If you continue into Python and you like it, try to have a look regularly on the different modules. Most of the time you see I don't understand what this module is doing. So it's modules which are building into Python. But at some point you will figure out that you do something all the time. You define a small function that you are using all the time. And you figure out that there was a module built into Python that was doing it for you. And that when you just look at the list, you didn't understand what it was. So typically, you have the path to a file, and you have you want to have access to the parent directory. So you have a string. You just want to remove the last part with the last slash and the name of the file. You want to remove that. At first, I was building a function that was doing that for me. It took me maybe 6 months to understand that there was a module that doing all those kind of operation directly. So try to have a look, and sometimes you have nice surprises to deal with. Okay, so we are going now to write our module. So we are going to define our own functions that are going to use into the interpreter. So for that, we are going to define the function in a text file. Okay, so if you are in Windows, so if you already know what is a text editor, you are programming in other languages, and when you have one favorite text editor like gedit or Vim or Emacs, I don't care, you can use it. For those who never programmed or who don't really know what I'm talking about, and if you are on Windows, just use Notepad. So you hit Start menu, Notepad, it would just a very simple text editor would be perfect. If you are in Mac, it's a little bit more tricky. Because the one by default is TextEdit, which is a good tool, but you need to make some things to prepare the program to write plain text. So please, if you have a Mac and you are going to use TextEdit, pay attention. I say that, but each time people don't pay attention and have problems, so I want to say it. So the way you do it, you just open TextEdit here. So it's opening here, a new document here. So normally you should not have that. You should have something like, I'm just going to, like something like that. Okay. See if you see like the ruler, the bold, italics, etc. It means that something is wrong. You are not using it the proper way. It's because TextEdit by default wants to make you write things with plenty of formatting, italic, like the size of the font, etc. You don't want that. You want to write a very simple text file with just characters and no formatting. So the way you do it, you go into Format here, and you click on Make Plain Text. And normally all the ruler and whatever will disappear. Okay. Once you have done that, you have other things to do. So when you write, TextEdit want to be helpful for you. So for instance, when you begin to write a sentence, it said, oh, a sentence should begin with an uppercase character. So it's automatically transforming the first letter of the line by an uppercase is not what you want. So be sure not to have that. And typically something which is a nightmare because you don't see it very properly. So if, for example, you want to introduce a string, here, so you introduce with a simple code here. It wants to be nice to you and to transform this straight string by the curved ones or something like that. A different character, and Python know what this guy here is. It does not know what this guy here is. It's a curved, is a different character. So it tried to transform it for you. You don't want that. So the way you do it is you go in Edit, Substitution, and remove pretty much everything which is here should be unchecked. So remove the quotes. Typically, it will avoid that. You will remove the smart dashes because it will transform like the small minus sign by the longer one, those kind of things, etc. Be sure to have nothing here in substitution and spelling and grammar. Be sure to have everything unchecked. Typically, the correct spelling automatically, it will avoid to have like uppercase at the beginning of the line. Okay? Be sure to have that. And if everybody did that, it's okay. Okay, so we are going to combine everything we have learned today. We are going to write a function that is going to look at, okay, we'll take it to a sequence as a parameter, and look at if it begins beginning with a certain motif or things like that. So we're going to write the pseudocode. So it's a function that takes a sequence as a parameter. Going to print the sequence if it starts with ATC. If the sequence starts with AGC, it prints starting with AGC. If the sequence starts with neither, print starting with neither ATC nor AGC. Okay. So we wrote our pseudocode, and we are going to translate that into Python. So when you see my slides and you see a white background and a black foreground, it means that it is in a text file. So it needs to be in a text edit or Notepad or whatever you are using. So that's a text editor. If you see a black background and a white foreground, it means that it's something which is written into the terminal. Okay, I know that in Mac by default the terminal is a white background and a black foreground, but on my slides it will be with this. Okay. Okay. So basically, I'm going to write that in the text edit. So in that window here, you're going to begin to write here, and you begin to write. Def, so I'm going to introduce the function, starts with ATC, so that's the name of the function, the name of the parameter that will be used in the function definition here. I'll call it sec, why not? I go to the column. If there's a column, there's an annotation for sure. Go to the line. Here, there is a line beginning with the sharp hashtag sign. It's just comments. So you use that, and Python will not look at this code, will not interpret it, and will go directly to will go through that code without looking at it. But it's very useful for you when in 2 months you will look at the code and try to understand what you have done, or even more important for other people who will look at your code and try to understand what you are doing. When you are writing yourself, you're kind of in your own logic, and it's kind of annoying to write comments and say, I know what I'm doing, and it's very straightforward for me right now. But try to read the code of somebody else, and you understand that comments are so much useful. Even look at your code that you have written like 6 months ago. It can be very useful just to have a few lines explaining what you are doing. So basically here I'm explaining what I'm doing. Prints. Okay, so maybe this one is an extreme example, but just to show you, prints the sequence it starts with ATC, etc. Okay, so and then we began for sure for real the real definition of a function. So there's an annotation because it's part of the definition of a function. If sec dot starts with the motif ATC, then it prints the sequence, right? Go to the line, else if, elif, in reality, sequence starts with AGC, then I print starting with AGC. In all other cases, else, I print with neither AGC or ATC or AGC. Notice here that you have a double indentation. The first indentation is to indicate that you are part of the definition of the function, and the second one is to indicate that you are part of the definition of the if statement. Okay. Okay. So you have written this code. Try to be sure they are not doing typos, things like that. Be sure to save it in your home directory. So typically it will be where you see a small house and an icon with a small house and with the name of your login, a directory with a login, directory with an icon of the small house, and the name of the directory is typically your username. That's a good directory to be. So if you are in Windows, if I remember well, it will be in the, oh sure, yeah. I think it should be something like C colon sharp or backslash. I think it's directly users or user, I don't know, and that's your login name. I think it's that now. If it's not, maybe there is like, I'm almost sure that it's that, but maybe it's in Windows. Here, you should set Windows.
There's only one backslash.
Only one, but that here?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, a long time ago, I was on Windows. If you are in Mac, so let's just say I've wrote my text here. I want to save it. So here it's by default, but usually it is in My Documents by default. In fact, it's the parent directory of My Documents. So the way to do that, you can hit Command and up arrow. If you do that, it will bring you back in your home directory here. It's the small house. That's the name of the user for that computer. That should be your name. Okay, everybody has that. Be sure to save it here because Python is looking in some particular places where to find your file when you call it. And one of the file is your home directory. Okay, you save it and you save it. So you can use another name, but it should not contain space, no fancy characters. It should begin with a letter. It can contain numbers, but not as the first character. And it should end with the extension .py, not .txt. Maybe we'll ask you how you are changing the extension. You really want to do that? You said, yes, I want .py and not .py or .txt or .py.txt, just .py. Yeah, so that is because you have the rich text. So you should not have this ruler here. So the way you do it is make plain text. And I think here you can do it, it will work. Okay for everyone? Yeah? A general question or? So QC Collaboratory is my own username, so it should be like workshops or something like that. But the icon should be a small house. That's the key. Okay. So you saved your module. So I remind you, a module is you write a function in the text file. You saved it somewhere where you can have access to with Python. And then you go back in your terminal. You open Python 3. So you have the chevrons here. So you are into Python. And you are going to use the module that you have defined using the same syntax as we did for math. So here I'll go back into Python and look at starts with ATC. Python tells me, oh, I don't know what starts with ATC is. It's not defined. But if I do from workshop, so the name here of the file, the name here of the module, in fact, is the name of your file without the .py. Is why I asked you not to use spaces, not fancy characters, etc. You need plain word.py. So here from the name of the file without the .py imports the name of the function. If you did it properly without any typos, it should work. It should just give you back the chevrons here, saying that it waits for you to do something. So it means that it managed to import the function. Then you can do starts with ATC and use it on one particular sequence. So here starts with ATC, so it starts with ATC, so it prints the sequence. Another one will start with AGC, starting with AGC, and here starting with neither ATC or AGC. Okay. You have high chances to make some errors. That's totally normal. Don't worry. It's totally normal to make errors in programming. If you have an error, try to understand what it meant. You can raise your hand and ask me if you don't know what it is exactly. Try to correct it into your file here. And so if it was before that line, if like you did from workshop import something and it does not work, you change something, go back, you can use once again this function. If this line worked, but it was when you're executing the function that there is a problem. Okay, I'm going to answer the question online in a minute. The easier way is to exit Python. You just hit exit, run brackets, and you come back into Python. You use up arrow to import once again from workshop, import something, and use it again. So I have a question on the chat. Where do I get the slides? So I'm going to copy paste. It will be easier. Copy. Copy link address. Here you should have the slides. Where do we save the file again? So depending if you're in Windows or in Mac, but typically you need to save it in your what we call your home directory. So it will be a directory with a small house as an icon, so like this one. So if you are in Mac, typically when you want to save, by default it brings you into My Documents. In fact, the home directory is just the parent directory of documents. So the way you do it in Mac, you just hit Command and the up arrow, and it brings you to the parent directory, which is the home directory. So when you see like a small house and the name of your login here, it means that you are in a good directory. If you are in Windows, use go in C column / user and your login name. It will be in that directory. Another question. Sorry, I'm just finishing with people online. Do we have to? So yeah, basically answered. Yeah, and answer for Windows. I hope it's clear for Windows. So that's C column / users and a login name. Maybe. Yeah. Okay. Question. So it's general question or no? You didn't open the directory. You didn't open the.
No.
You should do that. And then So here you see you have the directory which was in the chain,
Yeah.
and then you
Oh, then if you started this way and then moves in that direction.
okay. So what you didn't install Python properly. I try to find the other way to do it. I will try it. If it's not.
So it's not installed.
Because, okay, so it's all I won't find it. So in fact, when you can you go here? You're just going to reinstall Python in the proper way. Asking the instruction to cross this image. Start now, take 5 minutes or 2, and normally you open you can really need to close it and you open it, and you can have access to that. So just install it, and then you can just go here, here, and use Python, you will open it. You are all right. So, put you on the call, and what you say. Yeah, exactly. This time it's really yes, this is open the document. You use just print space to open. How do you open the I went to downloads and you find it. Okay, so move it here. Okay, yeah. So for people, yeah, it's the last slide if you manage to just doing that. So it's the last line if you manage to have the good results, then you're free to go. And I'm staying here if you have questions and so on to debug everything without any problem. Okay.